Walt Disney World is filled with world-class rides and shows. These attractions are typically the result of years of careful development and revision. However, one of, if not the most beloved show at the resort, didn't really follow that timeline. Festival of the Lion King at Animal Kingdom was a rushed, last-minute, temporary show, created to help fill the void of the cancelled Beastly Kingdom. It would be the temporary anchor of Camp Mini Mickey until Phase 2 of Animal Kingdom could begin construction. But the constraints and rush that the show was created under ended up working to its benefit and led to a show that has connected with generations and consistently ranks at the top of shows at Walt Disney World. The story of Festival of the Lion King goes to show that constraints aren't always a detriment to creativity, and it's one of Imagineering's greatest accomplishments. In January of 1990, Michael Eisner announced his plans to make the 90s the Disney decade. This was an ambitious plan to reinvent the Disney parks throughout the 90s. By this point, Disney MGM Studios had proven a financial success in its first year, and its expansion was a focal point of the Disney decade plans. With the near immediate success of MGM Studios and the effects it had on the average length of stay for guests, it was clear to Eisner that the resort could benefit from another new park. Eisner actually announced the in-development plans for a fourth gate with a Disney Decade announcement, saying it would begin construction at some point during the 90s. Beyond that, he kept things pretty vague, saying they had concepts, but needed more time before committing to a direction for the fourth gate. Behind the scenes, Disney had their eyes down I-4. If Disney could make a successful park and take away market share from a competitor with Universal Studios Florida, could they do that again with Busch Gardens Tampa? Busch Gardens had recently pioneered the theme park zoo hybrid, and it became a common destination for people looking to extend their Disney World vacations. Disney also looked internally at Discovery Island. Discovery Island used to be a miniature zoo located on an island in Bay Lake between the Contemporary and Fort Wilderness. The island was an upcharge experience that allowed guests to explore a variety of avian exhibits and some other small creatures. While the island was never a major draw, it did mean that Disney already had dipped their toes into taking care of live animals. So Eisner would greenlight a theme park zoo hybrid as Disney World's fourth gate, and he would put Imagineer Joe Rohde in charge of spearheading the project. Rohde's team's vision for the park would divide it roughly in half, the back half focusing on live animals that can be found in Africa and Asia, and the front half focusing on extinct and mythological animals. This split was perfect in theory and would allow for the more traditional theme park rides to not take away from the real animal experiences in the other half of the park. This would help avoid the problems that Disney MGM Studios faced on opening day with just two traditional rides. So development was going full speed ahead, and Animal Kingdom broke ground. Just a little over a year before Animal Kingdom broke ground, Disney had struck gold. The Lion King released in theaters in June of 1994, and it instantly became a classic. It's hard to put into words just how successful it was, but for context, it grossed nearly $1 billion worldwide. And the next closest movie from the Disney Renaissance was Aladdin, which only grossed $500 million worldwide. With this level of success coming from movies set in the African savannah and featuring a collection of animals, it likely helped push the announcement of Animal Kingdom. Eisner was not someone to turn down the opportunity to strike while the iron was hot. So, in the public's mind, that meant there was this immediate connection between the park and the movie. This was great for marketing and building hype for the new park. However, it did set up the expectation of a Lion King ride in the park. But that wasn't in the plans. The African section was designed to be beautifully and heavily grounded in reality, and the thought of an IP-based ride overshadowing the safari went directly against what Rohde's team was planning. However, it's kind of shocking that Eisner himself didn't push for a ride in the new park. I mean, it seems like peak Eisner to want a new movie with so many connective ties to get a ride in the park. But ironically, a lot of accounts from inside Disney at the time say that Eisner wasn't really sold on The Lion King being a hit, and he was more excited and focused on Pocahontas. This lack of confidence could be another reason why The Lion King wasn't planned for Animal Kingdom at the start. Eisner's lack of confidence in the movie may have led to it not being in the cards for Animal Kingdom, but that didn't stop him from inserting it into the parks. In Orlando, a condensed puppet show retelling would open at Magic Kingdom called The Legend of the Lion King. This show was popular, but was replaced by the 3D movie Mickey's PhilharMagic in 2002. Starting with Aladdin, though, Disney had a trend through the 90s of new movies getting parades in the parks just before their films released to promote them. You had this with the likes of Aladdin, Lion King, Hercules, Toy Story, and Mulan. But Disneyland was the park chosen to receive the Lion King activation, and it would debut the Lion King celebration just 2 weeks before the movie. The parade would feature 6 floats and introduce not just audio animatronics to parade floats, but also what Disney dubbed puppetronics, which were puppets that utilized mechanical and animatronic technology to allow for puppets at the scale of a parade float. The parade opened with rhinos leading a group of dancers and drummers. They would lead in the first float, featuring Rafiki and Zazu on the front, and 2 large giraffes on the back. Then gazelles and ostriches lead in a float with a large tree and various chimes and bells on it. The next unit consisted of crane dancers and 2 remote-controlled crocodiles that would pretend to bite guests along the route. Next up was a giant elephant float which swung its trunk around. This would lead into the next float where monkeys would swing around. Leopards would dance around them, and Pumbaa could be found at the back of the float looking at Timon, who was leading in the next unit, along with a remote-controlled bug. Following Timon was a large float of various percussionists and dancers, all adorned in bright costumes with the extensive use of raffia. This would lead into the final float that was a recreation of Pride Rock, with adult Simba looking out over the zebras and cheetahs dancing in front of the float. Nala is also featured below Simba, and atop of it was Mufasa's face inside of a sun. The parade was a hit, and not just because the movie was a success. The parade leaned far more into the African art and treated the movie like a folktale rather than taking the movie off the screen and onto a float. This stylistic treatment made the parade stand out from what Disney had done in the past. The parade would go on to win a Thea Award and help increase attendance at the park, making it a huge success just like the movie. However, by 1997, it was time for Hercules to get promoted, and the Hercules Victory Parade would take its place and retire the Lion King celebration for good. Back at the still under construction Animal Kingdom, they were hitting a few snags along the way. Namely, they severely underestimated the costs associated with properly caring for this many animals outside of their natural habitats. And also at the same time, Euro Disney's financial nightmare that was going on. Disney was forced to make a choice between keeping the land based around dinosaurs or the one that was based around mythological creatures. Several factors like cost, Disney's dinosaur beginning development, and the lasting effects of Jurassic Park on pop culture resulted in Dinoland USA being greenlit and Beastly Kingdom pushed to Phase 2. Disney didn't really make any major announcement saying this, however, in official preview materials released in 1997, the land was left out, and in its place was nothing. It took until very early 1998, just before the park's opening, to find out that on some of the land originally planned for Beastly Kingdom, Disney had designed a temporary land that would help disperse the anticipated large crowds. It also solved an issue that the park feared it could face with no place to meet Disney characters built into the park. The explicit direction of the park up until this point was not to include characters in live theater shows, but with the loss of Beastly Kingdom and growing concerns that the park wasn't Disney enough, Eisner made a last-minute call and pivoted directions. So, Camp Minnie Mickey would open alongside the park. But it's not like this land was given even the same budget as something like Dinoland, which itself people feared was underdeveloped. This land was given an extremely low budget and less than a year to get off the ground. So designers made the land themed to an Adirondack Mountain summer camp, something easy to accomplish. One half of the land would feature 4 individual character meet and greet huts that would host a rotating cast of characters, including some really random ones from time to time. The other part of the land featured 2 shows. The first stage show was Pocahontas and her forest friends. In this show, Pocahontas learns how to protect Grandmother Willow's forest from a variety of trained live animals, including a real raccoon representing Miko, which was a really bold choice for Disney, but I actually think it really works well here. In the end, Pocahontas realizes that we are also an animal that can help protect the forest instead of destroying it. The show is a more unique take on a more traditional zoo animal demonstration, and was less of a story show and more about seeing the animals and Pocahontas interacting. While its message may have been heavy-handed in a very 90s way, the show was good for kids and did a decent job at hiding its originally temporary nature. Remember, it was not at all a secret that this land was a placeholder until something more permanent would take its place in Phase 2 of the park. Even in Disney's official guidebook at park opening, they knew they couldn't let guests have a false sense of the area being a fleshed out land like the others at the park. and instead of calling it a land, they referred to it as a character greeting area. So, for a show in a stopgap land, Pocahontas and her forest friends served its purpose well enough. The other show in Camp Minnie Mickey on opening day was also designed as a last-minute temporary show. But instead of tying into Animal Kingdom's conservation theme through its story, it would tie into that theme by embracing the idea of recycling.
He didn't want any parades, he didn't want any stage shows, he didn't want any characters, any of that in the Animal Kingdom. And by the way, it's the same philosophy that Walt Disney Imagineering had about the studio, Disney MGM Studio. When it opened, it only had 7 street performers scheduled who did mime. They didn't want any parades, any stage shows, any spectaculars, any of that kind of stuff. So in both cases, about 6 months before the park opened, I got a call from Eisner saying, we changed our mind, now we need a parade, now we need a stage show, etc. And of course, we were just fast-tracking from then on, because we had no stages, we had no support in the back area. No, it was not programmed for anything.
Disney tapped Ron Logan to create a stopgap show on a shoestring budget within roughly 6 months that could not only fit into Camp Minnie Mickey, but also solve the problem of guest expectation for The Lion King in the new animal-themed park. Ron Logan was an Imagineering legend and was instrumental in the creation of Fantasmic, SpectroMagic, Illuminations, Beauty and the Beast live on stage, Voyage of the Little Mermaid, Lights, Motors, Action, and even Beauty and the Beast on Broadway. If anyone was up to the challenge, it was him. And coincidentally, another one of the projects he'd worked on was the Lion King Celebration Parade. So Logan worked to create a show that would kill, or create, 2 birds with 1 stone. He started by buying the old floats used in the Lion King celebration from Disneyland for Animal Kingdom, and he paid a single $1 for them. Finding a way to recycle these floats became the centerpiece of the rest of the show's development. This meant the show should take advantage of the fact that these floats could move, so he pulled inspiration from his background in marching band and wanted to have the show parade into the theater. This also then allowed the theater to be in the round and achieve a summer camp look that would match the rest of the land. It also meant that the theater itself didn't need to be enclosed and could use cheap off-the-shelf bleachers for seating. Now that they had the framework for the show, the next step was finding the story. While on paper it would have been easy to do some sort of retelling of the story in a condensed format like Beauty and the Beast live on stage, there were 2 slight problems with that. For starters, The Legend of the Lion King was still running at Magic Kingdom as a condensed retelling of the story. But the other issue was that in 1997, Disney brought Lion King to Broadway. Disney had dipped their toes into Broadway with Beauty and the Beast, which Ron Logan himself worked on, but The Lion King was a different animal. The show was a full-length retelling of the animated film, but done in a way where it was clearly aiming to be an artistic showpiece of storytelling and theatrical prestige. Its use of puppetry and costume design took what the parade did to an entirely different level of blending human and animal forms together. The show brought a level of sophistication and deep emotion to the story itself. The team knew it would be foolish to try and do a condensed version of the movie and draw comparisons to the Broadway show, which just debuted and was quickly becoming a classic in its own right. So they looked at what resonated best with families in the animated movie: the music, the comedy, and the spectacle. This led to the show becoming a musical revue setup where live vocalists would sing through the hits of the movie's soundtrack and performances would accompany them. Instead of taking place during the movie, the show would take place after, during a celebration of the events of the movie. So now it was a matter of creating visual interest throughout the music because the floats had already come in, and they were now static. Mind you, by this point in development, the park is 3 months out from opening, so whatever they could create to fill this space was essentially their only option. With the clock ticking, the team would do their best to create a show that could open in just 3 months and be the anchor of a section of a brand new theme park. So, no pressure. What the Imagineers came up with started with guests entering a theater in the round and being sat in one of 4 bleacher sections, each representing either warthogs, giraffes, lions, or elephants. Now, let's talk about what the show was like during its first performances during park previews. The show begins and the 4 hosts come out to greet the audience. After introductions, Zawadi picks out a member of the warthog section to be her new best friend. This sets up a crowd interaction segment where each leader takes a section and selects a member of the audience to make the sound of their section's animal and lead the rest of the section in afterwards.
But I looked it up and I found a low bleating sound much like that of a baby lamb. Well, that.
section goes, they all join together to call in the rest of the animals to the celebration. A group of 8 dancers, each dressed in a stylized representation of African animals, then enter the theater as the opening of the Circle of Life plays. Simba then kicks off the celebration officially as I Just Can't Wait to Be King takes over the soundtrack, and a procession of the animal dancers, 4 stilt walkers, 3 tumble monkeys, 2 birds doing ribbon dancing, and the first float with Timon riding on the front. This float is the recycled giraffe float from the original parade that had been scaled back to just the one giraffe this time. From a side entrance, the next float comes in, which was a retrofit of the monkey unit, which retained one swing, which the 4th tumble monkey will ride in on. On the back is still Pumbaa, who, like in the parade, is a puppetronic and not a fur character. Behind Pumbaa, the 2 sides of the center stage float come in, which was the only original float created for this show. Then center stage rolls in, which locks in to create a simple looking stage made out of rocks. The elephant float from the parade then rolls in from the side entrance, still working with the waterfall below them. Then Simba comes in on his float, which had been modified more heavily than the others in the show, lowering the overall height and removing Nala in the process. As the final 2 floats rolled in, the tumble monkeys and stage techs assembled various acrobatics equipment on the center stage. This completed the setup of the theater, and the whole cast danced through the final chorus of I Just Can't Wait to Be King. Timon then dismounts his float as Hakuna Matata begins being chanted. The next act of the show is the Tumble Monkeys. Ron Logan said they decided to put an acrobatics act in the show because, quote, we couldn't figure out what to put in there. They were up against the clock, and they didn't necessarily want to invent an act themselves. So rather, they wanted to take skills that performers already would have and work that into the show.
Direct from a record-breaking 2 million years at the bottom of the evolutionary ladder, ladies and gentlemen, the Tumble Monkeys!
So what you see are professional gymnasts and acrobats performing stunts to entertain instead of for a score. This combination of acrobatics and entertainment creates a balanced act that lasts through the duration of Hakuna Matata without ever getting stale. Timon wraps up Hakuna Matata and the monkeys begin breaking down the apparatuses on stage, folding in mats and letting the bars go up into the rafters. As the stage closes up, Kiume returns with a new dark headpiece alongside a hyena, and ominous drums fill the air. The animals all enter carrying drums and shields, and as Timon tries to reason with Kiume, thunder rumbles, scaring away Timon and the monkeys and ushering in Be Prepared. As the song continues, live percussion is added by the cast, and the dancers use ribbons to fill the instrumental break. We will get back to what is very obviously missing here later. At the end of Be Prepared, a rope is lowered to center stage, and the 2 birds, Moto and Maji, take the spotlight as Can You Feel the Love Tonight is sung. The birds begin with a ballet-style performance complete with lifts, but halfway through the song, Maji's attached to a cable and the act switches to an aerial performance, and the song goes instrumental. When the show was first developed, the 2 birds were actually played by a brother-sister duo who already had an established aerial act. So this was another case of taking something that already existed and plopping it into the context of the show. This brings the show to its final celebration, beginning with the Circle of Life and the whole cast back out on stage dancing along. Then Simba invites the audience to join in by singing along to The Lion Sleeps Tonight. The dancers pick out a small group of kids from each section and give them shakers, while the singers teach the rest of the audience how to sing along to the song. The kids chosen to participate parade around with the dancers, and the crowd sings along with Timon. Then it's time to take home the show with a recap of each act, this time accompanied by the whole cast, beginning with Hakuna Matata and the Tumble Monkeys, then followed by the birds and Can You Feel the Love Tonight, then Kiume singing Be Prepared, we will still get back to that part later, and finishing with I Just Can't Wait to Be King, and an extended finale of Circle of Life. Simba roars as the cast takes their bows and they exit the stage. The floats and puppets remain in place as Timon politely asks the crowd to leave.
Now, please, get out!
So, the reason I want to walk through the earliest version of the show during previews was because that was the first version of the show that Michael Eisner himself saw. Eisner, who was known for his very hands-on leadership and love of tinkering, shockingly only had one note for the team behind the show, and that was that he wanted one more stunt act in it, and he suggested maybe fire. Eisner gave them just 2 weeks to make that change. So, the team scrambled and went up to the Polynesian resort and took the Samoan fire knife dancer from the Spirit of Aloha dinner show and added that act to be prepared alongside of the dancers drumming as well as during the finale. And you know what? That worked flawlessly and made Eisner and the crowds happy. The only other changes from previews to opening were alterations made to the dancers' costumes to make their animals clearer and the raffia not shed as much. The Tumble Monkeys' costumes did essentially get entirely redone, giving them a lot more flexibility and less cumbersome headpieces. But really, beyond minor changes like those, the show was shockingly untouched from even the earliest stages of development. Even before Animal Kingdom's opening day, Ron Logan and the rest of the Disney company had evidence that the show was a success. During previews of the park, even before the addition of the Fire Knife Dancer, the show was drawing in crowds, and word of mouth spread quick that this show was a must-see part of the new park. By the time opening day actually came around, the show was consistently full each performance, even with its super high capacity. Guests loved the music, the energy, the spectacle, and the interactivity.
That, incidentally, was the cast of the Festival of the Lion King, which is one of the hottest new shows here on the Disney property. Yeah.
The queue for the show was quickly extended due to demand, with guests in the early years reporting the show hitting capacity an hour before showtime. In a park with minimal characters, Festival of the Lion King brought those characters into the park, but in a way that didn't detract from the overall design and intent of the park. While Simba, Timon, and Pumbaa are there, Timon is the only one not represented by a puppet and is really a part of the show. The true stars of the show are the vocalists. During the majority of the show, Timon, Pumbaa, Simba, the giraffe, and the elephant are simply just on the sidelines reacting and blending in with the audience. Also, while the show didn't hit you over the head with its message, the message of the park was a part of the fabric of the creation of the show and the music of the movie. To the average guest, I doubt it was clear that the show was thrown together in less than 6 months, and key elements of the show weren't even in place until 3 months out. If they weren't familiar with the parade that took place on the other side of the country, the floats felt like they were designed specifically for this show, and not bought for $1. There wasn't a time for a true second draft of the show, which meant that everyone brought their best to the table at the start, and creative and talented people were trusted to be creative and talented. Each act was allowed to be their own driving force, and it shows in the way that the essence of the act isn't lost in the Disney of it all. All of this created a show that guests just couldn't get enough of, and achieved beyond any Imagineer's wildest expectations for it.
The Disney characters get wild for fabulous entertainment of every kind. There's a whole land full of them at Camp Mini Mickey. So tell the kids, or any kids at heart you happen to know. And everybody's cheering about Festival of the Lion King. A dazzling don't-miss celebration of song, dance, and acrobatics featuring Simba and his friends.
You just forget everything that bothers you. You have no worries. Nothing bothers you anymore.
Hakuna Matata, yeah, Hakuna Matata, that's right. We were singing that last night.
So now there was this weird problem on Disney's hands. A good problem, but a weird one nonetheless. This show that was intended to be temporary in a temporary land was a massive hit, and at this point was ranking as the #1 show at the resort in guest satisfaction surveys. At the same time, for a variety of reasons, Disney decided to not move forward with Beastly Kingdom as phase 2 of the park. And I don't think it's unreasonable to assume that something that made that decision easier was that the hit show of the park was sitting on the land they'd be replacing. So Disney was far happier to keep Camp Mini Mickey alive as they went back to the drawing board on what could better utilize that space potentially in the future. Disney decided that if the show was going to stick around, they should at least make it feel a little bit less temporary. So the show was originally housed in what was referred to as a shed. And while the shed was covered with a roof, the sides were open air, with plastic covers that could come down for rain, but without AC, you wanted those sides open whenever possible. But by late summer of 2003, Disney decided to put in the investment and enclose the theater, add air conditioning, and do some upgrades both on stage and behind the scenes to make the show feel a little bit more permanent. At the same time, Disney was developing a budget castle park over in Hong Kong and decided to look back into the well of a Lion King stage show over a more traditional ride. While having the same name, finale medley, and very similar floats, that's where the similarities really end between these two shows. The Hong Kong version is a condensed retelling of the movie and takes a lot more inspiration from the Broadway musical than the Animal Kingdom version. It is interesting to me that they still decided to keep the name, stage layout, and floats for what is essentially a different show, but I digress. As the 2000s continued on, the show's success didn't waver, and if anything, it grew along with the rest of the resort. It was still consistently filling its theater show after show, becoming something that guests returned to every single visit. In 2009, Disney would bring some new technology to the show, swapping out Timon's head to an articulated one, allowing for blinking and lip sync throughout the show, controlled by radio frequency. But the show was still in what was meant to be a temporary land, and it was really the only thing located there that couldn't be easily relocated. At this point, Pocahontas and her forest friends had closed down as part of budget cuts due to the 2008 recession and never reopened. The meet and greets could easily be moved to other parts of the park as there were less barriers for characters outside of Camp Mini Mickey by this point. The land was the most obvious place for Disney to expand Animal Kingdom when the time came, and there was concern for what that could mean for Festival of Lion King. Those concerns became even more prevalent when in late 2011, Disney announced their plans to build an Avatar land at Animal Kingdom. Some people were excited as this was Disney's first major response to Universal's success with the Wizarding World of Harry Potter. Some people were sad about losing the 90s charm of Camp Mini Mickey. Some people were angry about how an IP land was going to fit into a park as cohesive as Animal Kingdom. But a common thing was that people were concerned about the future for the Festival of Lion King. As much as it was quickly built, it wouldn't be easy to relocate. However, Disney would put people's minds at ease just about a year later in October of 2012. Chairman of the parks at the time, Tom Staggs, told the Orlando Sentinel they were, quote, committed to keeping Festival of Lion King as a part of Animal Kingdom. While they didn't have any specifics beyond that, it was well received that the fan favorite show wouldn't be pushed out by Pandora. Only a few months later, at the start of 2013, Disney would reveal plans to build the brand new Harambe Theater on the outskirts of the Africa section of the park, and the new theater would be home to Festival of Lion King. Construction on it would begin shortly after as the Pandora project became more and more imminent. In December of the same year, it was announced that Camp Mini Mickey would close on January 6, 2014. This meant the final performances of Festival of Lion King in its original home would take place on January 5th. While Disney tried to rush the construction on the Harambe Theater, it wasn't fast enough, and Festival of Lion King wouldn't hold any performances from January 5th until summer of 2014. Closing day would come quickly, and while most people were fine with seeing Camp Mini Mickey go, Festival of Lion King was packed all day, with loud crowds saying goodbye to this temporary show in its original shed. The next day would be the first in Animal Kingdom's history without Festival of Lion King and Camp Mini Mickey, as the bulldozers came in and work on Pandora began. When guests walked up to the new theater, they were instantly impressed by the far more elaborate and fitting facade and queue for the show, as well as the extra details added in that really fit the rest of the Harambe village. Once inside, the theater looked nearly identical, just with a few quality of life improvements from a guest standpoint, such as wider aisles, a better loading procedure, and about 100 extra seats. Behind the scenes, the new theater gave the show the star treatment it deserved by this point. All of the parade float puppets got a much-needed full rebuild after being used for 20 years longer than expected. The backstage support areas for the show were much more robust and built out when compared to the original tunnels. And potentially the most noticeable change was an entirely new lighting grid that was designed for an indoor show from the start, allowing for much more theatrical lighting throughout the show instead of the previous lighting, which was originally designed with ambient lighting in mind. On reopening day, it was clear to everyone that Disney did understand the importance of the show and that no expenses were spared in moving it to the Africa section. It was also very clear that Disney took care to insert the intellectual property to the very grounded land in a way that didn't take away from the rest of it. This put a lot of people's minds more at ease as Pandora's construction went vertical just next to the new theater and IP was becoming more integrated into Animal Kingdom. The show is now very clearly a permanent part of the fabric of Animal Kingdom and a fan favorite with locals, tourists, and everyone in between. If there was anyone left who viewed the show as temporary, they were proven wrong once and for all, as the show continued wowing full audiences year after year. Shortly after, Pandora would open next door and find immediate success, and bring with it what many consider the best years of Animal Kingdom. It felt like the park was running on all cylinders and was complete, and Festival of the Lion King was its premiere show. That all came to a halt when COVID shut down the entire resort on March 15, 2020. Live entertainment, for obvious reasons, was hit the hardest by these shutdowns. The whole resort went dark until July when the parks reopened, albeit in a very different experience. It would take until October for Disney to test the waters on shows again, with the reopening of the Frozen Sing-Along at Hollywood Studios. That show was far more suited for distancing with its limited cast, large theater, and no dancing. It would take until April of the next year for news about Festival of the Lion King.
And live performances returning to Disney World, at least one of them. Disney says the Festival of the Lion King at Animal Kingdom will take the stage again this summer, but it's not clear exactly when. The show uses a cast of live actors, singers, and dancers. Disney says it will change the show to allow social distancing both on stage and backstage, and they're also planning to change the seating for the audience.
The show was going to return, but in a modified format referred to as a celebration of Festival of the Lion King. This version of the show would premiere in May and be noticeably different from the start. The show started without the audience participation and new choreography and blocking to spread out the cast much further apart on the stage. As the floats moved in, it was obvious that the Tumble Monkeys were missing. Once Hakuna Matata started, the dancers took their place on the stage to annoy Timon and lead the hand jive. The song would end quickly and move right into Be Prepared, which luckily was a solo act that maintained well in this version of the show. The birds came out and performed a new ballet routine, which attempted to still act as a duet while keeping them separate. Any aerial part of the act was cut, and the birds stayed grounded. The next major change would come during The Lion Sleeps Tonight, where the audience participation was replaced by half of the crowd being told to clap, and the other half being told to wave their hands. Animal names for the sections weren't used because they were never identified at the start. Otherwise, the show continued similar to the original and finished with its grand finale. The modified version was a breath of fresh air for the time when live entertainment was basically non-existent anywhere, but the modifications did make people long for when the full version of the show would come back. I think it's telling that in terms of more difficult shows to adapt to the times, Disney chose Lion King as the test. Even being fully indoors, they knew that Animal Kingdom needed the show back more than Hollywood Studios needed something like Beauty and the Beast. But when meet and greets returned in April of 2022 and people started noticing some job postings for some very specialized union roles, it became clear that the full show was going to be coming back shortly. A celebration of Festival of the Lion King would close on July 5th, 2022, and the Festival of the Lion King would once again fill the Harambe Theater on July 16th, 2022. The show returned, still without the audience participation, but otherwise the monkeys and birds were back at full force, and so was the show. By early 2023, the crowd participation had returned. However, the section callouts of each float as they rolled in never really returned, even to this day. Nevertheless, the show was back in full force, and for a lot of people, that marked the end of the COVID era at Disney. Now in 2025, the show is still one of, if not the most beloved shows on property, and considered a must-do for a majority of guests. In a park filled with real animals and world-class rides, the show found a timeless formula that can't be said of a lot of stage shows. When talking about things that Disney would never remove, I fully believe Festival of the Lion King is included on that list. The show has done such a good job capitalizing on the Lion King property at Disney World that it has helped cover up the somewhat shocking lack of one of Disney's biggest movies at the parks. Think of how much Beauty and the Beast there is at Disney World. You have Enchanted Tales with Belle and Be Our Guest at Magic Kingdom, live on stage at Hollywood Studios, the sing-along and meet and greet at Epcot. But the only Lion King characters you may ever be able to meet are Timon and Rafiki, and even they aren't in a consistent meet and greet spot. But even more glaringly, there hasn't been a Lion King attraction at any Disney park in the 30 years since the movie released. That was until the 2024 D23 Parks panel, when it was announced that a Lion King flume ride would be coming to Disney Adventure World in France. The ride is slated to open in 2027, and it's incredibly exciting to see. Many people are hoping to see this ride or something like it come to Walt Disney World, but what's interesting to note is that a lot of park fans are making these concepts in such a way that ties into and doesn't remove Festival of the Lion King. Even people who aren't big stage show fans understand the importance of the show and that it isn't going anywhere. The show has outlived and grown beyond every expectation set for it. In just 6 months with minimal budget, Ron Logan and his team created an all-time great theme park show. The show is the epitome of the saying, constraint breeds creativity. While all theme park projects face many constraints, it's rare to see it at the level of Festival of the Lion King, especially in modern times. It's a Small World and Disneyland as a whole both had rapid turnarounds of a year, which is even more insane. But they were also done at a time when public judgment was low. Fear of creating something not worthy wasn't the same, or at least not nearly as prevalent as it is now. Disneyland did have the constraint of potentially bankrupting the entire company, and It's a Small World had the challenge of representing the Disney company's ability to create attractions before Disneyland. But I think it's important to note that all 3 of these rushed projects ended up as massive runaway successes. What makes Festival of the Lion King so successful in the face of these constraints to me is where what little budget they had was spent. I think a lot of people could have looked at the task at hand and would have decided to spend the budget on one specific wow moment. Remember, this show was going to be the e-ticket of Camp Mini Mickey whether or not it was worthy. So I think for a lot of people, that could have sent them down a path of creating a show around one moment instead of a sum of its parts. What the team did, though, was find ways to build the infrastructure they needed for as cheap as possible. Ron Logan recounted debating on whether or not to pave the floor of the show or leave it as grass to save money and make it feel even more like a summer camp. They put up an open-air shed with off-the-shelf bleachers in a brand new Disney park with no concern for the optics of that. They bought old floats out of Disneyland's storage warehouse for a singular dollar and repurposed them for an entirely new show. They spared as many expenses on the infrastructure so they could put as much of the money as possible into the people. The Festival of the Lion King is as successful as it is because it's a show that at its core is about human connection and celebration. All of the budget was put into its entertainers, and it shows in just the sheer amount of people on stage. This not only makes for a captivating show where there's always something to look at, but it also means that it exponentially increases the amount of moments performers can connect with the audience directly. This goes hand in hand with the show being this celebration and musical review where the performance isn't about giving this dramatic retelling of the movie, but more about being entertaining and putting smiles on faces. It's not concerned with matching the movie, it's more concerned with recreating the feeling the movie left people with. Building off of this, so much of the show involves audience participation. The only sections that are light on it are the 3 stunt acts. Bringing some guests out on stage and constantly involving the rest of them makes the show feel fresh every time, and it's something that only a few Disney shows do. But what also makes the show feel fresh every time is the live singers. This is something that kind of fell out of favor for a while after Festival of the Lion King, but has recently made a comeback, and I'm glad it has because it elevates any show it's in. It allows for each performer to put their own spin on the show and make it feel like a true performance and not just a theme park show. This is what I think they thought would be the wow moment in the show when they were designing it, and they were right. Many vocalists have started in Festival of the Lion King and gone on to perform on Broadway or in other major productions, giving this credibility to the level of performance the show brought. Performers like Darnell Abraham, Dion Randolph, Trista Dollison, and Christopher Mackenzie Jr., just to name a few, all got their start at Festival of the Lion King. And then you also have people who have stayed with the show for decades and have become Disney royalty in their own right. Even if the rest of the show didn't hold up how they wanted it to, Imagineers knew that guests would still be wowed by hearing the Lion King songs sung by Broadway caliber vocalists. But the rest of the show did hold up. The Tumble Monkey act fits perfectly alongside Hakuna Matata and gives comedy to the entire show, while also displaying impressive acrobatics combined with showmanship. The birds do the same thing, weaving romance and elegance throughout the entire show before showing off an aerial routine that perfectly encapsulates the feeling of the music. And Michael Eisner's one note rounded out the rule of threes perfectly with the Fire Knife Dancer breaking up the show with a beat of tension and another major wow moment at the same time. What's so important is that each of the performers in the acts doesn't just do their act and leave until the finale. They're truly a part of the show throughout and augment the dancers and stilt walkers. All of these people bringing their own unique skill sets and being allowed to shine in their moment is really what makes the show a sum of its parts. When Ron Logan was talking about the show, he just simply said it all clicked. Which, yeah, the show has a quality to it that just can't be easily described because it can't be tied to one moment. It can only be tied to the show as a whole. The show really didn't need time to grow into itself because all the performers in it were essentially told to do what you do best and we'll adjust once we get it off the ground. But because each individual performer wasn't being micromanaged and given more creative control than they likely ever would have, they instinctively did what they do best. Instead of having to spend months training the Birds Act on specific aerial maneuvers that management thought would work, they let the experts drive the decisions. Ironically, while the Imagineering team had so many constraints, the performers had so little. This led to the first preview performances of the show in front of executives to be able to, properly capture that lightning in a bottle alongside of a crowd with the executives. They not only hit the nail on the head in their first try, they hit it so hard that even someone as hands-on as Michael Eisner was afraid of messing with the magic too much. This investment in people not only led to a more entertaining show, but it also led to one that could fit under this incredibly tight budget. The upfront costs of a show can be a lot, especially when having to build an entirely new theater and support areas backstage. But once the show is running, day-to-day costs are a lot less expensive than that of the average attraction. But Festival of the Lion King reverse engineered this by creating the cheapest possible infrastructure to start, but spending those savings on maximizing their day-to-day operation, almost seeming to know that if they did their job correctly, guests would overlook the cheap frame because the art was so engaging. Once the show was successful, it had the ability to reinvest in the upfront costs they cheaped out on before. It's a lot harder to argue to executives for additional day-to-day staff in a show that's already successful, but it's far easier to ask for a one-time investment in making a show last another 20 years. This is why the show was able to shed its temporary origins so fast. The parts that were obviously meant to be temporary only lasted 5 years. Once the theater was closed in, you'd have a hard time telling the unaware guest that the show was created with the expectation of being replaced within 5 years. It says something that even as the rest of the land around it became more and more obviously poised for replacement, Disney themselves was attached to keeping the show. The fact that a temporary show essentially got 3 different theaters built for it over the course of 15 years is just not normal. Even something like the recycled parade floats is a footnote that surprises people when they find it out for the first time, even as those floats and puppets are over 30 years old now. The show not only outgrew its temporary beginnings, but it also outgrew the desires for a Lion King ride in the parks. Its ability to capture the artistic expression of the movie and its inspirations filled the void for a Lion King ride since the movie came out. This is in spite of the fact that the movie's cultural relevance never wavered, and it cemented itself as the crown jewel of post-Walt Disney movies. For a company that's become so obsessed with IP in the parks and finding any excuse for brand synergy, Disney never rushed into what could seem like a slam dunk to many of a Lion King ride in the Africa Land Animal Kingdom. I think this is mainly because the show was already able to do that in their new theater, and in a way that didn't stray from the mission and sentiment Animal Kingdom opened with. The Festival of the Lion King is one of the most fascinating stories of how a theme park show can come to be. Every detail in its development would lead you to believe it shouldn't work. Like, you're telling me that a show designed in 6 months with reused floats bought for $1 in a shed they weren't sure they'd be able to put a floor down in, that didn't closely follow an already established story and mixing 3 distinct and separate acts with live singing, was not just going to open, but also become the gold standard of theme park shows? But somehow, the show captured lightning in a bottle and achieved beyond even its creators' expectations. The show didn't get a second draft because it didn't need a second draft. Its legacy and importance to Animal Kingdom as a whole is obvious. Very few shows would outlive the destruction of their original land, and even fewer would get the level of investment and care put into relocating and preserving the show even through COVID. The Festival of the Lion King to me is one of the greatest feats of Imagineering, and even more so because it all came together in months.
It was all thrown together. The whole thing. Camp Mini Mickey and all that. But guess what? It worked. Very few changes to it. For years, it was the number 1 show on the entire property. Now, it wasn't just a show we did. It was the great artistic value of that movie, with great characters, great music, all of that. I just took it and we made it a live thing.
Thank you for watching. This has been a video I've wanted to make for a while here, but it just took a little bit longer than expected to find information about like the actual development for this show because it all happened so fast and pretty long ago at this point, like relative. But I hope it was worth it and it gave you a bit more appreciation for the show itself. Otherwise, like, comment, subscribe, comment any like memories you have of Festival of Lion King. And yeah, I will see you next time.
Let's get out of here!